Hi everyone. This was an interview between AJ, aka Squid Tips, and myself. We had some recording issues on my end just because I'm not super used to doing interviews except in a written format. So trying to figure out some stuff like that. We got it working, but then I accidentally made a mistake and I put my camera over theirs and I thought it was recording the screen. It actually covered up his face. So to compensate, most of this video will be our logos, and it'll function more like a podcast. The audio was preserved okay, and I have an image here at the start that shows, look, here's them, here's me. We're actually talking. It's just the video didn't turn out okay. It's just my face, not AJ's face. So rather than have you stare at me the entire time, I'll just have our logos. Got the recording going. And we got you. You can see me. I can see you. This is neat. I've never got this working before. So I'm so...
That's awesome.
It's hard to do like tech support stuff like that, like over the phone. It's no small feat.
Yeah. And streaming is like a whole different setup. Like I really struggled. Like part of the reason I make like video essay style content is because I really just couldn't get streaming or my helmet microphone and recording set up correctly because it was just too difficult. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah, so I got my, oh right, I can just have, since I'm not recording the screen, I can just pull, I don't even have to have it on my phone. That's handy. Yeah, so I'm not like super well practiced at this point, but basically for starters here, I thought we could just introduce ourselves, and I'll just give like an elevator pitch of myself, and then if you want to give a elevator pitch of yourself. In regards to me, I am Persephone Vanderwart. I'm a trans academic, author, and activist, sex worker, pornographer, illustrator, and I started off in academia doing my undergrad in 2014, my grad school work in 2017, 2018, and then after that, I did my post-grad basically from that point through COVID and then after COVID. And basically from October 8th, 2023, I released my first book, and then over the next 3 years, I would release another 9. Some of the books they're more like booklets or a novella or something, but now that that's done, I'm mostly just focusing on more on the ground stuff, more interviewing people, getting my work out there, but also interacting with people such as yourself.
Cool. You're doing the praxis part of the theory to praxis and then back. That's awesome. It's a thing. I keep having conversations with other people in activist spheres, and we all kind of feel like that's like a really missing piece for so many people. It's like people doing a lot of work, on the ground or in the book, but not mixing the two as much, and not iterating. Yeah, so I'm AJ. A lot of people just call me Squid because I got a YouTube channel called Squid Tips, which I made back in 2017. I'm kind of a tech worker by trade. I started out my career like kind of Best Buy to Geek Squad, and then I moved to Seattle to do tech stuff, and that got me into a cybersecurity career where I spent about 6 years. My last position was working for Nordstrom, which ended suddenly last September. Related to my YouTube channel, which when I started making it, I made it because I've been a motorcycle rider for many years. Almost exactly half my life is going to be exactly half my life will be this year. I'm turning 40 this year. I got my bike at 20. Yeah, it's out. Oh, I'm not excited to be 40, but it's a lot shorter than 39. So 39 is just not a great number. I don't like that number. So. But yeah, so I created that motorcycle channel because I just wanted to teach people. I was building a lot of skills. I wanted more people to ride motorcycles. when you ride a motorcycle, people just ask you about it. A lot of people are interested. You can tell, like, a lot of people, there's desire, but there's not the information. So I really enjoy having those conversations. So I wanted to kind of democratize that. And I wanted to protect people, because I just had so many people that I knew would crash and die, and from things that felt very like survivable or like avoidable entirely. So, but kind of by chance, my whole channel kind of took a different turn when a detective in my local county sheriff's department, just kind of drew a gun on me randomly during a very strange traffic stop. But I got the whole thing on my GoPro camera, and I went public with that, and I ended up suing the sheriff's department. And like, it was a whole thing in my community, and people still, when I meet them, they're like, "Oh my God, you're the guy that had the thing happen." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's me." Like, and that extended recently to in the last year or so. I'm very connected to the trans community. I put out a video after the people. I'm in the Seattle, Washington region, and Seattle is a very deep and rich activist community that I feel very fortunate to be integrating myself into. But during the 2020 George Floyd uprisings, there was like a big thing here where a section of our downtown was kind of considered an autonomous zone. And I went there and I hung out, and it was a lot of people who liked police accountability. And so I've been very much doing that activist work. And in the last year, I've basically been, since getting fired from Nordstrom for my activist work, I've been doing that kind of full time as a volunteer basis, and just realizing there's a need to teach people how to do activist stuff, what the norms are, because I realized coming into it, I made a lot of mistakes and I didn't understand how to do it. And I had to kind of just figure it out as I go. So,
yeah. So you kind of basically, you did what I was going to segue into, which is talk about your work. So that's a nice summary of what you do. And to leapfrog off what you were saying in regards to my work, the activist side of it is basically from an undergrad to my grad school days, when I had to go overseas to Britain from where I was living in Michigan. And while you're in grad school, you're in a thesis program specifically, you have to pick a topic to write about. And honestly, I was told by a lot of the professors at my alma mater from back home, when you pick something, a master's thesis is just the beginning. And if you decide to, you can very easily take that and do more with it. So what I ended up doing is I finished my master's thesis when I was at a school called Manchester Metropolitan University, which was the Gothic Center of, or the Center of Gothic Studies in Manchester. So it was like a nucleus, and then there were all these different schools around Manchester, England, where people would come, and specifically in October, they would have different instructors, and they didn't call them, professor was like a fancy term, so the British and the Americans have different ways of talking about, if you call someone a professor in Great Britain, you're usually referring to someone who's like at the top of their field. But so if I say professor, I'm just talking about like a professor, someone who's a teacher, someone who would teach at a university, but not necessarily the highest level. But there would be instructors, researchers, and different people in the Gothic more broadly that would come to Manchester Metropolitan. And it was a part of something called the IGA, or the International Gothic Association, which is literally, if the Gothic is in larger academic mode, where you have different people and you get eco-Gothic and Gothic in regards to the study of cinema, literature, written literature. I knew someone, Chloe Germain Buckley, who specialized in young adult fiction, but also LARPing. So for my graduate program, I had two supervisors. One of them was Dale Townsend, and he was very old-fashioned. So when I told him I want to do my master's thesis on video games, specifically Metroidvania, which are like, you're in a maze and you have to walk around and there's monsters, basically. It's like if you look at Metroid, it's basically the female version of Theseus, except you're also the monster. So there's a lot of
I'm
different
a
things.
big fan of Dead Cells, and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. There's roguelike and roguelite,
yeah.
Soulsborne, Zeldavania, Castlevania, and the Metroid style, which basically mazes and labyrinths. One's unicursorial; it goes to a center spot. The other is a maze, which has different entrance points and exit points. You can have dead ends.
Which one is Hollow Knight?
Well, Hollow Knight, that was part of my master's thesis. So
Oh, that's cool.
I wrote my master's thesis on primarily, if memory serves, Hollow Knight, and I talked about Metroid, Super Metroid, I think is what I focused on, but the Metroid franchise and Hollow Knight. So at the time, Hollow Knight basically as time went on, and I can't remember exactly what I said in my master's thesis because it's less developed, and I incorporated some ideas that I kind of abandoned just to focus a little bit more on the spatial side of things. There's a theory in Gothic called a chronotope. It means time space, and it's a literary device. In the Gothic, chronotope is literally a castle, but the castle represents, in the narrow sense of the word, historical time. And when you walk through it, there are all these reminders of time in that narrow sense, specifically markers of dynastic primacy and hereditary rights. So if you're in a castle, you might see a coat of arms or a suit of armor, and those are markers of time. So when you walk through time, you're basically walking through a museum, except in the neo-Gothic sense of that, it's very Scooby-Doo. The suit of armor might get up and walk around, or a hand might come out of the portrait like a ghost. Hollow Knight really plays around with that, except it's the bug version of that, where everything is bug themed. It's Bug Hamlet. Something is rotten in Denmark, except in the case of Hollow Knight, the villain is the Gorgon. And spoilers, I guess, this is all based off like old mythology. So there's a secret boss very similar to Dark Souls. And if you do all the fetch quests and side quests, you can make your way inside of someone who's inside a trap. And inside this person's mind is the Gorgon. And if you can get inside the trap, confront the person, duel them, and you have the magic sword and the magic password that you acquire through basically all of these fetch quests, you can go and confront the game's version of Medusa. In my opinion, Medusa is actually the hero, and she's speaking out through her prison to infect the land, which is her saying, I was forgotten, I was betrayed, and I'm going to haunt people after I die. And so Hollow Knight's kind of a combination between Castlevania and Metroid and Dark Souls. So it's kind of got a lot of different things going on. Because it's an indie game, they didn't have to worry about any IP conflicts. In Japan, you can't cross over IPs, which is why you don't see the word Metroidvania, because it belongs to Konami and Nintendo. Whereas Team Cherry basically cut their teeth in 2015, 2016 when they started making Hollow Knight. They could do whatever game they wanted. And of course, now they did Silk Song, which is part Metroid, part Castlevania, part Dark Souls. And it's divided up into 3 acts, and each act feels like a distinct game, even though it's that same concentric kind of thing where you have Act 1, Act 2, and then Act 3. So it's, in Gothic, it's called the infernal concentric pattern, where the closer you get to the middle, the more disordered things become, the more, very similar to the monomyth, where the hero starts in a pastoral space, and then they get closer to the abyss, and then they go in there, they go into hell or the underworld, and then they emerge with some kind of treasure. You see it in Star Wars, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and a lot of other stories too. The Promethean quest is the same idea, except when you go into the space, you're turned into a monster. You don't survive the transition. So I'm like, okay, but how do I translate that to activism? How do I? And,
yeah, I see the issue.
because that's all literary analysis. And when I was in grad school, it was already too holistic because I had one supervisor who was a video games person, and then Dale Townsend, who was, sorry, Dale, dusty old academic, who, in his own words, well, Nicholas, I can help you with this, but I've never played a computer game in my life. I'm like, that's okay. Let me figure that out. And so that I had a lot of problems just from that. And then what I decided to do is I decided to take my Gothic stuff and just theory, mostly literary criticism, and try and conceptualize something that I would coin later called the horror's revenge. Because the oldest labor struggle, or the oldest profession, is prostitution. And if prostitution is the oldest profession, that would make it the oldest labor struggle. And the oldest labor struggle is something that still exists under capitalism through something called the Protestant ethic. Work is holy, but there are certain kinds of work that are sort of pushed to the wayside. You have the nuclear model, the family unit, and then from there you have something virgin whore. You have virgin whore. You may have heard virgin whore syndrome. Someone who has a Madonna, a wife at home, but then they go and chase the mistress. And they put their wife on a pedestal. They don't want to have sex with her anymore because they're just having kids with her, but then they might have a mistress. So keeping that basic idea in mind, through the state, capitalism in the state, you have various monopolies. You have Max Weber's monopoly of violence, and then you have Robert Asprey's monopoly of terror. In Asprey's terms, terror is the kissing cousin of force. The argument I make is that the state also has a third monopoly. That monopoly is what I call morphological expression, or monsters and sex. So if you watch horror movies, a common villain is the monstrous feminine. So this is basically the horror, but it can take a lot of different forms. You have good girls and bad girls. And I'm using cisgendered language, but this applies to anything that isn't, as Simone Beauvoir would say, a man. Woman is other. So I took the same basic idea and I said, nature is monstrous feminine, which means that anything that can be exploited by the state, be it workers, animals, or the environment, which is called more broadly unpaid labor, can be symbolized in a Gothic way. If you go back to antiquity, you would have Perseus. He needs to rescue, if memory serves, Andromeda. She's on a rock and she's like guarded by a sea monster or something. So Perseus is like, I know, I'll go to Athena, goddess of wisdom. She'll give me her handy dandy mirror shield. I'll go and cut off the Gorgon's head and I can get the girl. So it's a monomyth quest. He goes and kills the Gorgon, which if you read Ovid's Metamorphosis, it's actually, the Gorgon is a victim of sexual assault. Specifically, Neptune, Poseidon, the ocean god, violates Medusa, and she is violated in the temple of Athena. So Athena, because Medusa is violated, she ostensibly curses her with the killing gaze. But the way that Ovid frames it is that it's actually a anti-predation device. If anyone approaches the Gorgon, she can turn them to stone. So it's like a spike collar. They call those anti-predation devices, or porcupines, snakes for hair, the phallic woman, the avenger, the castrator. There's a lot of different ways to conceptualize it. But a lot of people would conceptualize the Gorgon as someone where you literally just cut off her head and do stuff with it. She's not a person. She's not even a monster. She's just a weapon. And she's a weapon that serves patriarchal modes of power out of antiquity, which, as those evolved into nation states and the rise of the Enlightenment, Cartesian dualism, settler colonialism, systemic racism, sexism, heteronormativity, all of those things, qualities of capital, and the monopolies that they have on violence, terror, and monsters, I'm like, okay, what if we could reverse that? And all you have to do, ooh, I'm a trans woman, I'm a Gorgon. You see me in public, you'll turn to stone. The basic process is called abjection. Abjection comes from Julia Kristeva. It is the study of repulsion, or something that's repulsive. And you have a state of normality and a state of abnormality. Kind of like young Frankenstein. We have abnormal, and to have a state of normality, like the nuclear model, oh, I'm a husband, a wife, 2.5 kids, a white picket fence, that kind of thing. And then you have everything else. This could be Muslims, it could be trans people, it could be black men, African Americans in the United States, any kind of minority that you could think of or marginalized population. They would be abject in the eyes of the state. They would be seen as criminal. They would be a witch to hunt, a werewolf to shoot with a silver bullet. Again, there's a lot of different ways you could frame it. And I'm like, if that's the binary, terrorist, counter-terrorist from Robert Asprey, what if you could reverse that? Because in their mind, a guerrilla, a freedom fighter, instead of being the terrorist in the eyes of the state, they reverse it. They're the counter-terrorist, and the state is the terrorist. Because the state, to hold on to power, has to use terrorist actions, stochastic terrorism in the United States, ICE in Minneapolis and around the country, slave catchers, the policing of firearms after the Civil War into Jim Crow, the right to bear arms. Never had permits until suddenly slaves were emancipated, and then the police would hand out permits. And keeping all of that in mind, all of the theory that I had, I just have to apply it in a way that's performative. And when I say performative, I mean like Judith Butler, where gender is performative, not because it's false. If someone said performative activism, that means it must be bogus, right? What if it's performative because that's how it's assigned meaning? And if I'm like Tim Curry in Rocky Horror Picture Show, I'm the transsexual transvestite from Transylvania, that doesn't have to be a negative thing, but it also draws attention to the fact that I'm alien. So as a trans woman, I am a monster, but like Frankenstein's monster, I want to appeal to others through the language of the alien to regain my humanity without ignoring the fact that I'm trans in my case. You can take the same exact idea and apply it to sex work, which is my focus, but also care work. There's a lot of horror movies about like evil nannies or wicked stepwives, that kind of thing. So I took and transitioned the purely theoretical bookworm kind of stuff. And the more I started dating in grad school, and actually as an undergrad, but I continued dating in grad school and in my postgrad, and the more people I met, the more they radicalized me, because I used to be a swerve. I used to get really mad at sex workers, and then someone I dated told me it's okay to treat them like people. And I was like, yeah, I guess it is, because I was from a very young age into sexology, but I still had some like internalized misogyny even as a trans woman. When I was in the closet, I had some shit to unpack. And the more time I spent with other people on the ground, specifically sleeping with them, because one thing I'll say, that a surefire way to get radicalized is if you're dating someone, because you want to meet them where they are. You want to understand their point of view. And as it turns out, the people I was dating were into BDSM, and they were into sex, basically, for lack of a better term, specifically. And it could get really specific because one person was really into twinks, and they were writing their PhD on twinks. And they would show me the literature of Dennis Cooper, the cinema of Greg Araki and Derek Jarman. So I learned about like the queer perspective during Margaret Thatcher's reign and the hacienda, and where do gay people go in a time of crisis. Also, sorry, this the academic journey and stuff like that is kind of long, so I probably should have written a little script. But
as long as this is what you're, I like I said, I didn't want to. I got you off on a Hollow Knight thing, and I wasn't. I'm sorry, I probably distracted you.
No,
Maybe that had
because my Hollow Knight work and my work on Metroidvania, it's the story of a heroine or someone who's female coded, lacking agency. They're vulnerable. They start off as small and weak. They go through the castle Velma Dinkley style, and they regain their power. But at the end of the story, they're still a woman, classically. And so it's not unrelated. It's just the starting point. And I was like, okay, Gothic heroine, theory. I'm dating people that are telling me the experiences of other minorities. You know what? I'm starting to get the feeling I might not be straight. Yeah, I think I'm trans. So from 2017 to 2022, I made this journey. I came out as trans, and then I started writing my books because that was not a smooth, easy transition. It was traumatic because I was changing my worldview, but also I was abused because the people I was dating were gender nonconforming. But the sad reality is it's an interview with the vampire situation where I was Louis, the person I was dating in grad school was my Lestat. They taught me some things, wounded me. I basically fell out of the breakup tree and hit several branches on the way down. And then I'm like, okay, it didn't kill me. I'm going to write some books. And as I was writing my books, I started working with other people. And basically, one thing I learned, hey, do you want to be a monster? Do you want to be a werewolf or a Medusa? And they're like, yeah, sure. Do you need me to keep my clothes on? I'm like, no, because the whole point of the Gorgon or the Amazon or the witch is a huge part of it is what's something that bothers people in the modern age that if they saw it in public, it might cause them to freeze up. Nudity. And nudity becomes a weapon because if you're behind a computer screen and you can do it, I'm not saying just flash people randomly, but if you can tie it to theory and be like, I'm a sex worker, and you don't have to be fully naked, you could just be in a bikini, but then have like different like tattoos, like anarcho-feminism. One of my cover models has Medusa on her stomach, and obviously there are other things that can be brought up that are more transgressive, like pubic hair is a pretty surefire way to get people kind of nervous, because even if someone's wearing a bikini and they haven't shaved and people can see pubic hair, they'll be like, so it's a very powerful kind of thing. You just have to find out how to make it mutually consensual, like an exhibit. I'm sure that when you've done work on the ground, have you ever encountered people who might fall into like a sex worker category? They can't just walk down the street naked, right? But they still have to communicate that they do sex work and that they're fighting for their rights. So they have to find a balance, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that. So my most recent action was just this weekend. It was for a bunch of queer and trans specific groups in our community, mutual aid groups, calling for a trans state of emergency because we have so many people coming to Seattle because trans people in states like Idaho and Florida and Texas and all these states that are passing these strange obsessive like laws around. So for this action, for this trans state of emergency, it's a bunch of trans people that show up, right? Well, there's this specific girl that comes up and she's fully naked, except for she's got these gigantic, beautiful rainbow wings she's wearing. And she comes out a lot. Now I've seen her at a few actions, but like the right-wing agitators are there and they're taking photos of her and they're just like insulting, they're saying transphobic things. Like they are poking fun at it because, to them, it's just like, it's so obscene that someone would be naked outside. But then someone I was talking to has met her. It's one of my friends in the trans community, and they're like, she hosts a like nude lunch out at Cal Anderson at the same time every week, right? And like, it's about body positivity, it's about confidence, and it's about destigmatizing like our physical bodies. And like, so much of that, like, I wasn't raised in religion, but I was married to someone who was Catholic, who was raised Catholic, and like, body shame and things like that were just so ingrained. And like, how much I was surprised, like leaving that relationship and then now being with the trans person, and then just so ingrained in the trans community, just realizing how much like sex negativity she had, and like body negativity, and how much that gate kept my behavior. Because when I started painting my nails, she had like a problem with it. Like, she was just like,
lovely color, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I really like I wear a lot of black, and so I like to wear like really bright colors. And it's got sparkle. You probably can't tell, but those got like sparklies in it too.
Yeah. Okay, I can see it.
But yeah, so I run into so many people in the and so many people in the trans community are doing sex work, because it's wherever you're at. Like you said, it's the oldest profession. No matter where you're at, there's potentially an opportunity to do sex work no matter where you exist, as long as other people are there. And not even that, you can be at home at your computer and doing, chatterbait. You can be doing all these different virtual sex work pieces. And it's like, for so many trans people, people want to fuck them, but like, society doesn't care about them enough to actually want to help them survive. And so it's just it's very predatory. And it's one of the things that really radicalized me. The more I met trans people, the more I realized how many of them were doing sex work, and like how many of them did it. And then like, while they were doing it, they were in really fucked up situations, like trying to like, in like living with multiple queer people. And it's like a household of queer people doing it, because again, it just helps their survival and increases the value of it. And it's just like, it makes me care a lot about that community, and realizing how it's just, I know it's part of why the right wing feels so safe in demonizing trans people, and like all that fetishization. And like, of course I've seen the people doing the sex work. I see the way that they are communicated to through those platforms, the way that how gross men are, and how like offensive and how degrading they will just assume that they can be, and like expect you to accept. And like, I opened up an OnlyFans at one point as like a backup, right? It's like, as I'm fired, right? I'm like, okay, worst case scenario, maybe I explore this, right? And like, I got a little bit of that experience, like realizing like, I mean, some people were super kind. Like, I don't say or do anything that I think indicates to people I want to be like, get like degrading messages, like, go fuck yourself, do not ever fucking talk to me disrespectfully. Like, but like, that's just how, like, getting that feeling personally was just, again, it's very empathy building. It's like, wow, you gotta play a character, like, this is a performance that you are doing. And like,
and so keeping all of that in mind, the idea of Shakespeare, all the world's a stage and we are merely players. And as a ludologist, someone who studies play, and is, insofar as there's a concept from a Jesper Jewell book, half real, and they say between the fiction and the rules. But I'm like, well, what if between fiction and nonfiction, but you keep the rules in mind? So if you have a stage, and then some people might conceptualize it, there's a stage and then there's not a stage, or on stage, off stage is how I put it generally. Professional wrestlers would call it kayfabe, or the wrestling dialogue where you have the performers, the audience, and the performance is actually between the two. So it's less a neat division, and it's more something that is occurring on a spectrum. And it gets very meta very quickly, and there's a lot of room for, basically, there are a couple of binaries as far as in terms of a dialectical material critique, to use a Marxist term. There are a couple of binaries, namely you have the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. though I would say workers more broadly, because proletariat historically refers to paid factory workers, when in reality there's a giant part of labor more broadly that Western Marxists like Marx, but also Stalin and company would ignore, which is sex workers and queer people, because Marx and Engels were famously homophobic. They would call them sodomites or Uranians in regards to of a third gender. So they would literally demonize them or talk about them like they're from a different planet. And obviously when you got to Stalin and company, they made some concessions early on where they made basically a lot. They were the Soviet Union was the front runner for queer rights. Then Lenin died. Stalin and company became more and more powerful as a bureaucratic institution that dialed back all of these things. I've heard people make arguments that it was siege socialism, but the dialing back of these things was before Hitler came to power in 1932, 1933, thereabouts, and he became Chancellor of Germany. In 1934, Stalin outlaws homosexuality because the year prior, they had burned down Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexology in Britain, the famous book burning photos. Most of those were to destroy information about gender nonconforming people. And it wasn't a perfect thing that was destroyed, because Magnus Hirschfeld was incidentally someone who had negative opinions about trans people. He thought that they were confusing, and so there are things that we could critique Magnus Hirschfeld for, but at the end of the day, this was the first clinic of its type that allowed for gender-affirming care that we would think of in the modern sense. And there's all this like historical stuff where in the Weimar Republic transitioning to Nazi Germany, you had whores. The whores of Weimar was like a party city. It was Berlin. It was a queer center in Germany, and there was a lot of activists that worked out of it and had already dealt with the Berlin Revolution, if I'm getting the name right, where you had in 1918, 1919, Rosa Luxemburg was killed, other activists were killed by basically the old guard of Germany before Weimar. And so after the Treaty of Versailles and the rise of the Weimar Republic, you had all of these soldiers that didn't have a job, and they were put to work basically putting down socialist revolutions. And then in the interwar period, on the streets of Weimar, you had sex workers that had to become more and more stealthy. They were called Berlin Coquette. And these coquettes, or Kokaten, I could be mispronouncing the German, but it's a sex worker who doesn't look like a sex worker. And it was a survival strategy. There was a specific academic, Jill Smith, who called them bourgeois coquette. And the bourgeois coquette were basically like these middle-class women who did sex work, but they dressed like, it was almost like an alter ego thing, where you have the normal everyday appearance, and then you have the alter ego where, okay, let's go back to my place and do dark magic. And what ended up happening is when the Nazis assumed power, the brothels of Weimar were closed up, and the horrors of Weimar were assimilated like various minorities. Disabled people were assimilated into the Reich, gender nonconforming people, people of color. You had people of color from German colonies that were stranded in Germany after the Treaty of Versailles. And they were all kind of absorbed into the Nazi machine. And then as the state entered crisis and basically fell back onto a war machine, we have to revitalize the economy by starting wars, like Donald Trump in America now. They started to scapegoat people. Their main scapegoat, or the one that gets publicized the most, especially through like American Hollywood, were the Jews. But at the same time, there were also the Romani, there were people of color, and all of the other groups that I mentioned, including gay people. They had to wear pink triangles on their arms. So they were given the same exact treatment But if you watch Schindler's List, you wouldn't have any idea that they even existed. And so that's a criticism of Spielberg, but that's a whole nother conversation. The point being is that in those days there was no internet, and people would communicate face to face, and they would literally have ways of communicating that the Nazis couldn't see or they couldn't understand, or they might look at it. Your trans friend that you were telling me about, where they're basically reclaiming public nudism as a means of reclaiming one's dignity, but it's also monstrous. And it's monstrous in the eyes of the people who are punching down at this person, but it's also a way of outing our attackers. Because if you're in a space of performance, you don't know who's good and who's bad. It's like a Scooby-Doo story. You don't know if Old Man Willoughby is a villain. So a nice, quick, simple way to get them to reveal their identity and take off their mask is, look, I'm trans. Here are my boobies. Oh no, I saw boobies. And then they start saying Nazi shit. And I call it the scratching method. If, like the Gorgon or the Amazon, you have public nudity either as a weapon or armor, and then someone sees you, and then they start acting like a TERF, acting like a white supremacist. There's a lot of different bad guys right now. But that is the scratching method. Scratch a liberal, scratch someone, a moderate, and they bleed fascist blood. And the scratching method is literally just how you present yourself in a performative way. Sorry, that took a minute to explain, but...
No, you've actually, I'm so glad you mentioned that. So, because you're making me realize that that's kind of what I have been doing in my community, is being able to point out these people, being able to get them to, out themselves, because like that is what's effective. Because when you go watch these people content, you see a very one-sided, like very hyper cut up, like all the stuff where I just posted a video showing my side of interactions with these like MAGA propagandists. And it's like their side looks professional. It's like very much gussied up in this totally different performance. And then, but in reality, behind the scenes, you see them saying transphobic things. You're seeing them operating like, truly like very immature. Like one of these dudes is in his he's like 47 and he acts like a high schooler. Well, but I also realized that one of the things I've provoked and what motorcycles is they scratch cops, because cops hate the idea that anybody can get away with a crime or like that they could just not have full control and authority over them. And when you have a motorcycle and when those cops are in their giant fucking cars, and especially when they're as poorly trained and such bad drivers as they are in places like Seattle, they cannot. Once I started explaining this to all my friends and like posting up videos about me lane splitting, driving between cars, just past cops, and showing like what are they gonna do? Turn on their lights and force? We're in the middle of like rush hour traffic. That's not gonna happen. That's very stupid. So, but they hate that, and like that is what has triggered all of this drama in my community. What has got to the point where a gang of like an unknown number of thugs have been scratched so hard that they are willing to show that I've literally been able to expose a right-wing extremist gang that has been doing violence to queer people in our communities, operating as part of our police department at this point. And that's such an amazing, it's amazing to have language for that. I definitely think about that more.
It's essentially a way to sort of sum it up is exploitation and liberation share the same space. And you can have someone who's framed as like a criminal in different ways. It could be someone riding a motorcycle. It could be a naked person, or Ghost in the Shell, Akira, a naked person on a motorcycle. And you could present that in different ways. Ghost in the Shell is kind of a weird example because the major in that story is actually a cop. It's the Pygmalion myth, where she's made by Pygmalion or Zeus this doll, and the sexy fetishized cyborg who's made to serve the will of men, similar to La Femme Nikita. And then eventually the ending of the story is she breaks away from that. She runs away from her employer and she goes off and does her own thing, and she becomes a ghost in the machine. She's no longer trapped in her body. And in the case of exploitation and liberation, it's dualistic, meaning that depending on who's using it, it could be for workers, it could be for the state, and there's some gray area in between, because people usually aren't just like super radicalized like us. And it took us a long time to get where we are. I didn't start radicalizing really, like super radicalizing, until I was 30, 31 when I was in grad school, which again, if you're dating someone, sex can be a very persuasive thing. And I'm not saying for any ace people in the audience, it doesn't just have to be sexuality, but if you're spending time with someone, a lot of sex workers are actually ace. If you have someone who's walking around naked in public in a public nudist kind of way, that's not even inherently sexual. If you have a sex worker and they're performing what is seen as a sexual act to the audience, it could be for them, they're performing a stunt. They're doing a form of wrestling theater. The face and the heel. It's not even, is it fake? Is it not fake? It's kind of in between. Some sex workers really enjoy it. They get very excited. Your body might have certain physical responses just so you can even perform. But a lot of sex workers I know, my first cover model, Blood Bunny, they're ace. And it's something that helped informed my own views on sex, because I used to think, oh, it's sex work. Everyone enjoys it the same, because I'm basically a total nympho. And I thought, oh, everyone has a really high sex drive. And then I realized, dating people whose sex drives were different than mine, or their appetites or attitudes might change depending on, how they're feeling. I'm kind of I have a one-track mind when it comes to that kind of thing. But when it came to working with other people as the artist illustrating a muse or a model, I very quickly realized that nudity as a form of code, or someone riding on a motorcycle doing something like that, it's very flexible. And in your case, and this is getting into something I wanted to discuss about the value of like motorbikes and motorcycles combined with sex work. So many sex workers I know are nomadic, and they're often unhoused. They're survival sex workers. I'm a sex worker, but I'm not a survival sex worker. I write from relative privilege, but I've worked with over 100 different sex workers. Many of them are survival sex workers. Many of them are trans people of color, fat people, disabled people. My partner, Bay Ryan, my co-writer, they're Irish Malay from New Zealand. They have sex worker unions there, but they're under attack. And the ability for them to defend themselves falls back on these kind of performances. Because some people think if you're normal, then you don't have pronouns. If you're normal, then you're not doing any kind of performance. I'm like, oh, I beg to differ. If you have different registers of communication, you might be in a locker room with the boys, you might talk a certain way. But if you're with the old ball and chain, the old battle axe, you're just using that kind of outmoded language, you might change how you talk. I guess a quick example would be Vegeta. When Vegeta's spending time with Goku, he's like, fuck you, Goku. But then when he's with his wife, Bulma, suddenly he's pussy whipped, And people are like that no matter how normal they appear. And if you take that into like a mode of activism where you're dealing with defenders of the state, cops, you're dealing with them in a physical space, but also like a space of performance, because they show up, they're literally wearing fetish gear. Like, they have their caps and their badges and the handcuffs.
Their short shorts.
Yeah, sometimes. Yep. And when you're confronting them and you got your bicycle, I imagine you have a bicycle helmet. Do you have a patch, like a leather vest?
I have a very distinct helmet. It's like it's a giant skull, and it's got like no Nazi stickers right here, and on the back, right in the center, it says "fuck ICE." Yeah, people know me. It's and like you said, like when I put it on, I mean, one of the things about riding a motorcycle that has always kind of been fun is like there's this thing called bike talk, you know, where it's people with motorcycle helmets and they're doing dances or they're doing silly gigs, right? Like it's just it's a whole genre of like it's not educational. It's just like entertainment content. But
they're not mutually exclusive, though, I would say.
No, and but truly, when you put a helmet on, I mean, it's cool. It's like no one can see your eyes.
Yep.
You know, you are a different person. And I do actually have separately, it's a super suit. And it is, when I'm out there corking, I mean, I do think of myself as operating as like almost like this superhero character, you know, above reproach, you know, like I'm fucking Captain America. That's what you can expect. That's the candor you can expect from me. Like a little bit heavier because I'm going to swear and scream at people and I'll beat somebody's ass.
Right. Yeah. It's not like Clark Kent or something where you're very mild mannered.
Yeah, exactly.
So take the same idea of the alter ego, but envision it as something where it's kind of an inversion where like this, instead of just having Sailor Moon, you know, we have the girls in their normal outfits, and then suddenly they're the Sailor Scouts. What if you could invert that and just be the Sailor Scouts most of the time? Because trans people are usually like that. Well, that's just how we look normally. And if you see us, like sometimes, you know, it does take a certain amount of effort to put on makeup and wear the outfits and stuff like that. And usually people have that, it's their battle armor, you know, and it's like, I am woman, hear me roar, you know, and the reality with that is you are going to have some people, we're gay first, and we're not necessarily defined by how we dress, but how we dress and where we do battle with the enemy isn't necessarily relegated to out of doors, you know, because when you and I are on camera, we're not necessarily wearing any sort of like you're not in your Superman outfit, your Captain America outfit, but you're still Superman. Just like I hate to use Quentin Tarantino as an example, but in Kill Bill 2, he said when he wakes up in the morning, he's Superman, and he puts on his Clark Kent disguise. And that's often how trans people have to operate, especially if we're stealth, where some people might have 1 foot in the closet, 1 foot out. That's a whole nother conversation. But just in terms of me, I'm Persephone, but I always look like this. And I have a deep voice, I don't pass. And it's not like ContraPoints where she would basically talk about, oh, I want to pass, and oh, you non-binary people are just making it so hard for us because I'm trying so hard to pass. And here you are confusing things by making it a non-binary. And the reality is, yeah, definitely, when it comes to when it's time for you to do battle, people can recognize you because your helmet and your outfit is made to be recognizable. It's I wrote an essay called Tactical Frivolity, which is you're a jester and you're in the king's court, but you're not actually like a Trump Tower. Instead, you're out in the street where the bootlickers or the boot wearers are, and that's where you do your work. And you said earlier that it wasn't educational, but you're educating people ipso facto by virtue of action. Watch me resist the police, and as you do, you're passing data along because you're a computer specialist. You're not just a guy on a bike. You are a computer outlaw. You know, this is your job, and your job is, the state would call you unemployed, but your employment is literally to do activism, you know?
Yeah, I'm using my tech bro douche money. That was what one of the agitators, they asked me. They talked a bunch of shit about it. They're like, oh, did you find a job yet? And I'm like, no, I don't need to. I got a bunch of money saved up, so I'm just doing exactly what I want, which is being right here in your fucking face. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, I told that guy when he got me fired, I was like, if you think any of this was Nordstrom was about to send me back to work 4 days a week. I did not want to go to the office 4 days a week. I didn't want to do 3. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're right. Like, I do think about it that way. And that is a lot of what I think about. I made a video, which actually ended up in a museum here called the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle. It's funny because it's got a bunch of Bezos money. like all these rich people. It's right on the waterfront here in Seattle. But they did it was called The Kickstands Up, 125 years of motorcycling in the Pacific Northwest. And it was using, it used a bunch of information, a video that I made from May Day last year. That's where I met this historian that was there, where my crew had the beginning. It was literally just like the precursor to what I have now, which is like a highly organized, highly specialized, like very capable crew. Like not only do we do, the traffic safety management and de-escalation, but we bring like medical people and like we do what's called the Care Bear aspect of like bringing people snacks and stuff, making sure that like everyone's hydrated, just like the basic, like, hey, we're having a good time, everyone's outside, like safety stuff. And like, but like the precursors to that. And like one of my videos in there, it was about anarchist calisthenics, and it was explaining to people how even resisting authority, like resisting unjust, like sticking up for yourself, operating off of principles as opposed to off of like peer pressure or pressure from systems. Like that's a skill, that's a muscle that you build. And like it kind of came to me as I started doing more reading about like not just Marx and Lenin, but like Che, guerrilla warfare, and Mao, and like and Zapatistas, and like larger other leftist movements from other like Latin America and stuff, and realizing like this is a thing people in our country have lost the ability to do. They only understand using the systems now, and they think that the systems, they don't realize the systems aren't working. The systems weren't expected to work. They were not designed for us, and if we do not resist, like we're not going to make progress. And like riding a motorcycle taught me to gauge risk. It taught me to like push through that fear and to see that there is value in developing skill and developing personal responsibility. I think that's something just people have like totally forgot, because personal responsibility goes hand in hand with the community mindset. You have to be like, those are interconnected.
And it's funny when I hear that term, I think of like neoliberalism, because neoliberals love to use it, but they also don't have a monopoly on it. And the reality is that as workers, we are atomized by the state. And these systems that you're describing, on one hand, they're not working for workers. On the other, they're working exactly as intended for the owner class. And one thing I found, especially since I moved back to where I am, because one thing I wanted to make sure that I said while we were talking is that I actually came across your work when I was in Minneapolis. I was living in Minneapolis during the ice raids, and they're still going on. It's just Tim Waltz was like, hey, make sure that you feed on people at night. I'm like, but for a while there, they had that one guy dressed like a Nazi. I forget his name now, but he got
Jake Lang.
Yeah, and he was there. They were doing when Renee Good was shot, and Alex Preddy, and there were a few other people as well who were killed around the same time. And it was very much a situation that was not just affecting, that was the more privileged people in society. And then suddenly they got news coverage, but there were also other. Keith Porter was another person I remember, a black man who I believe was shot in LA. I could be getting the location wrong, but he was killed around the same time that Renee Good was. And there was Silverio Gonzalez, who was shot after he was dropping off his children. And then there are different people, generational trauma and stolen generations. It's generally not something that white people think of as much, just because they're not subject to systemic racism the same way. They're the benefactors. And if anything, when you have the zombie apocalypse scenario, the gates of hell open up. There's no more room in hell. The dead walk the earth. They're conditioned to see rioters, what Martin Luther King would call the voice of the unheard, as terrorists. And then suddenly, from ancient Rome to the present, homo sacer, you fall into a boundary where you can be killed without ceremony. When cops are martyred, as they would call it, they get a giant fucking parade. They hail the victorious dead. When the people they kill, and kill with impunity, because they basically have complete and total immunity from state prosecution unless someone catches them on camera, like with George Floyd. But that's almost never happens. And even when that does happen, 9 times out of 10, they'll just get fired and sent somewhere else. They'll still be a cop. George Floyd, Derek Chauvin was the exception to the rule. And that kind of stuff was happening, and I came across your stuff started to come up on my feed. And just as we all exist in a larger space that is owned by billionaires, like Bezos money, and you said in Seattle, but the reality is that they only own things on paper, and the reality is that the streets are kind of this gray area where in Adelaide, where my partner was visiting, they saw the frog people, the people that wear frog suits, and so they nerd sniped me, and they were telling me about the frog people, and I was having a conversation with them and my best friend about the jester's privilege. And one way to fight cops, how do you fight them when you don't have a gun? Well, you have the eyes of the public, and if you can get them to pick a fight with a clown, it makes them look absurd. It makes them look super Nazi-ish, where you have Nazis that are basically attacking people that are ridiculous, not just Alex Preddy and Renee Good, who look normal, but someone dressed in a clown suit. It makes them look ridiculous. And it takes away that Einsatzgruppen. They want to appear like Death Knights, stormtroopers, but they're fighting Ewoks, And people like to think that victory is only when the armed walkers are blown up or something like a military action. But the reality is that it's also in the hearts and minds of workers. And if you can change the way so many people worship the ground the cops walk on, they're like, don't make a fuss, because most people know if you fuck with cops, you're going to get shot. And it doesn't matter who you are at this point. And I really valued your work because when I was there, and Renee Good was killed a couple blocks from my house where I was staying, and I didn't want to go outside, but there were people on the ground, it's like, and I'm like, is the pen mightier than the sword? I should go out there and help, but I didn't know anyone in the city. I was dating someone in the city, but when that stuff started happening, they kind of like went into like hunker down, it was bunker mode. So I was cut off from my only contact in the city, and all of this shit was happening on the ground. And I remember like watching your coverage because I felt hopeless. And I'm doing my stuff, and I'm like, who am I? I'm just a trans woman. But then I saw you, and I'm like, this person's really cool. And they got like their motorbike, and they're very, very confident. And like, to be perfectly frank, you gave me, I don't want to make any assumptions about your gender, but you struck me as an ally. You struck me as a cis person. But you were very brave, and you were confronting the cops, and you were raising awareness, and you were working with vulnerable people. And I was like, that really helped. Even though I would watch your videos from time to time, and it was almost like the old days in like the 1930s or 40s when you would listen to the radio to hear about Superman. And it had that kind of effect, but instead of like the normally problematic aspect of Superman or Captain America, where they're for the war effort to serve the ruling class, you were doing it more like Robin Hood. You were helping people like me. You didn't show up on my doorstep, but you were like another DBZ analogy here. I'm Gohan fighting Cell, Kamehameha wave, and you're like behind me, and it sounds funny, but Indigenous people, we believe in something. My partner's Indigenous, and I've spent so much time with them that I've adopted similar ways of thinking, wherein we're not always in the same physical space, but we're there with each other in spirit. And because we're often, especially as queer people, divided between vast gulfs of land and sea. My husband lives in New Zealand, and the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and if I would want to fly out to see them, assuming that I could even make it because of ICE and DHS, it would be like $5,000 or something like that. But they're with me, Big Trouble in Little China. China's in the heart, Jack. Wherever I go, she's with me. And that same exact thing applied to you in the work that you do. I haven't had a conversation with you until today, but I knew who you were at least since Renee Good was shot. And I started seeing the work that you were doing. And this brings me to one other thing that I wanted to discuss before we wrapped up, which was cybersecurity. And one thing that really intrigued me about you, not just the motorcycle, though that was super cool, was the fact that you specialized in cybersecurity, and you had a video, it may have been like a YouTube short, where you were talking about how, well, once upon a time I've been a gearhead for a long time, and I used to do computer stuff, and now suddenly I'm using what I acquired all those years ago to help people. And I'm paraphrasing, and sorry, I'm using the Captain America voice, but that was kind of how it sounded, and it was cool. And I also grew up watching superhero movies back in the 80s and the 90s. So I saw like Supergirl back in the 80s. So on VHS. When I saw that, I remember you very specifically talking about cybersecurity, and at the same time, right around the time Trump got elected, I had poured my life's work onto this website. And I had an old blog that was on Blogger, and it wasn't even on WordPress yet. And I had to find a cybersecurity person to help me with that. And I literally had to go onto Reddit and be like, "Dear Reddit, I need someone to help host my work because I'm trans and I'm starting to get censored by Google, basically, because I do sex work and stuff like that." And I didn't know about age gating really. And I mean, my website was age gated, but Blogger wouldn't let me age gate. And they were starting to censor images of girls in bikinis and stuff like that. I'm like, why is this getting censored? They censored a review that I wrote about Chernobyl, HBO's Chernobyl. They called it hate speech, even though I was just talking about the reactor and how you can't get radiation sickness is not a zombie apocalypse like the show was portraying it. And so I found someone, Josey and I'll just have a link to them in the description. So I'll let you know who they are after this. But they were someone who specialized in cybersecurity since the 1980s. They had a master's in computer security, and they specialized in a computer business that is largely centered around helping different marginalities like sex workers, but also just people who are housing challenged, people who don't have enough money to live the basic necessities like housing and food. A lot of that is sex work. Not all sex workers are housing challenged, of course, but a lot of them are. A lot of queer people are like that. And I'm like, I approached them and I was like, "Dear Josey." And I reached out to some other people as well. They're the only one who got back to me. And they're like, "Oh, hi, yes." And I found out that they were like the perfect fit for me. And they're like, "How did you find me?" And I was like, "Well, I went onto Reddit and someone recommended you." And they're like, "Perfect, you get a discount." And I'm like, little old me. And all I can say, because I wanted to give you a chance at the end here to talk about the cybersecurity stuff that you do, is having someone. If I'm Neo and I'm in the Matrix and I have Tank and he's doing Mr. Wizard and he's basically sitting in the computer chair and helping do these different things to help me navigate a space, or in my case, archive. My books are all backed up now. They're backed up onto different servers. I have all of my files on a cloud service. I didn't for the longest time. I used to have all my passwords on a text file. And then they're like, no, don't do that. No, 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 no. Get this. There are different services you can use, and it has military encryption and stuff like that, and it'll remember all your passwords. It's not like Google, where if Google stores your passwords and then they get hacked, and then suddenly you're not secure anymore. Someone could have your passwords. So that was a huge load off. And I guess in regards to you and the work that you do, how does it feel what does your work entail? And do you ever work with people like one-on-one? And if so, how do they feel about the help that you can lend them, even if it's just advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think I developed a cybersecurity acumen the way that most people do not. Most people go to school, like it's like an education thing, but like computing and technology has changed so rapidly. Like I just learned it through interacting with people. Everything you just talked about, right? Where you're like, okay, I didn't have my stuff backed up. I used to have a password like document. Well, that's better than having just like sticky notes with it around your computer monitor, which is how a lot of people did it.
Yeah.
I helped people through making these types of mistakes at Geek Squad, like through seeing people not back their data up and have a hard drive go bad and lose every document for their business, all their photography of all of their children, like learning what that was and being like, oh, I want to help people. I don't want that to hurt other people. And so that was a lot of who I helped at Geek Squad. And then as I went on in my technical career, I mean, what I do in cybersecurity today is basically that. I just do it for companies at a bigger scale. Nordstrom had 30,000 systems that we need to think about, not, one or like a small business or whatever. So,
and in just real quick here to interject, are you familiar with the quartering?
Yeah.
And when you said Geek Squad, it reminded me because he used to do Geek Squad, except in his case, he was literally telling pedophiles how to hide their illicit documents. So you're like the opposite of that person. And where you used your skills to do good, basically. So I just wanted to mention that. Sorry to say his name and your name in the same sentence, but just like he chose the path of evil, and you chose the path of good.
And I'm glad you bring that up, though, is that in my technical career, I mean, that is one of the things that as you get higher up the cybersecurity rabbit hole, as you get into these higher level, like ethics is so important because you are literally, I said in a recent short, I talked about how like cybersecurity people are the ones who get, like, we literally are the ones that have to look in all of the closets and be like, what are the bones here? Holy shit. How do we clean this up? What do we do? How do we make sure this never gets out? Like, that's like a part of your job or at least advising like, hey, this is a huge problem. Like how do you mitigate those things or at least elevating that? But the reality is we live in a capitalist world and like there are companies that don't want to actually solve those problems, right? Like they would rather, it's cheaper to cover it up.
Exactly.
It's cheaper to pay for the litigation afterward. And that's also like kind of disillusioning because that's also why a lot of cybersecurity people become very radicalized. The Matrix is such a perfect movie. I rewatched it recently, but it truly is. I do feel like we are living in the Matrix, and that is how the cybersecurity profession has prepared me because the internet is not a real thing. It is its own unique world where we all don this avatar, whatever that version is. But like it has an impact on the real world, but it is not part of the real world. It is its own thing. And that is one of the ways that we defeat the people with money and the people with the systems and the techno oligarchs is by going into the streets, because in the streets we can talk to each other, we can interact with each other. We're not competing with those same it
levels the playing field.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's an industry where if you like puzzles, if you like to think analytically, it teaches you to think analytically. Like you cannot be a cybersecurity person and not be like living in reality. Like you can't have a well-developed critical thinking because that is what it takes to solve problems and design solutions.
Sure. My grandfather in basically from the 1950s and onwards worked with computers. Now these would have been very vacuum tubes and punch cards, but into the 1970s and 80s, he basically worked with on-site data storage for corporations. It was a heart and lung corporation. It used to be SARNS, then it was 3M, and then it was purchased by Terumo. And but they had these on-site data storage, and they would call it redundant storage. And they would have to have all of these, basically these on-site servers where they would just store data. And in those days, you would have to write algorithms to access the data for these corporations, because they would need these very precise blueprints to make different machine parts that were tied to the making of heart and lung machines, where if there was something wrong, someone could die, And so as a little girl and a teenager, I would hear all of these stories. Gramps would come home and he would sit in his chair and he would talk about some puzzle that he was working on. He's like, for me, it's like solving a puzzle. It's a game, because nothing is standardized. And that lack of standardization and that decentralized approach to punching up in places where we can level the playing field. If you go outside, if you can make it a theatrical space where the bourgeoisie could, have access to all of this really powerful military hardware or paramilitary hardware, but if they can't drive their car down a street, it's of no use to them. And if people can find places to congregate and get the message out, pass it along to light the beacons, there's nothing that they can do about it. And the reality of any occupation, be it Vietnam, be it Palestine, and any other sort of proxy state, vassal state, through proxy war more broadly, is that their hold on it is always limited. There's always a lifespan. And their approach is, of course, always to use bombs, always to use violence. But then, in the case of Vietnam, for instance, they literally just took the bombs that were dropped on them, because some of them didn't explode, and they just made them into booby traps. And basically, the more money they threw at this country, the reversing of abjection, right? It was literally, it's the mirror shield. You just bounce it right back at them. In the case of that, they literally used terror warfare. The jungle was terrifying to American soldiers. They were there because of the poverty draft, and it got to the point where they were killing their own officers, fragging, and so that they didn't have to go out and fight. And there's a whole nother conversation about how there was no discernible metric for victory during the Vietnam War, except for the number of people that they killed, most of whom were civilians. And if you can find ways to overwhelm the system, like a computer, eventually it will crash. And any kind of anti-colonial tactic that you see overseas can occur at home. Anything that we do will be seen as violent. The cops will look at you and your motorbike and they'll be like, evil, bad. And they'll look at me and, oh my God, I've lost track of the number of people that have messaged me and said that I'm basically the Antichrist. And I'm like, how? I just want to have equal rights, And so it's very, the work that you do in terms of taking your cybersecurity skills and that puzzle solving, because nowadays, a computer can exist as a handheld device, and the skills that you learn to solve puzzles, I imagine you've probably taken outside of your computer store days when you were working for the Geek Squad. You never thought that would serve you during a rebellion. But
no, yeah, right.
But
I really didn't, but you're totally right. It is the thought process of learning to think, okay, this is where I'll give a perfect example. And this was, I made a video about this. It's related to ICE. There was a big, when they came to Seattle and we started seeing them, there was a big protest downtown. We marched to the federal building, and there was like, it was probably the most aggressive protest there had been here since George Floyd. And that isn't to say a lot. Like, there was like a dumpster burning in the middle of the street. We were kind of just hanging out, milling about. People spray painted the federal building, you know, fuck ICE, ACAB, anarchy symbols. But nobody broke glass, you know. No cars were flipped. Nobody died. Like, but the cops were out in their full riot gear, and they were in their battle lines, and they had the high ground on this hill, and they were marching, and people were backing and forth, and me and just like 3 or 4 motorcycle people were there, and I was handing out stickers like, how's everyone doing? We having a good time, you know, like whatever. But I'm seeing this, and I'm like, you know, like the people on the front lines, they're like screaming, you know, they're like, don't get kettled, blah, blah, blah. And I look at my buddy and I'm like, yeah, hey, y'all want to like follow me real quick? We should go do something fun. Let's just go around the other side of the cops and let's just see what happens. And so we ride our motorcycles like up the hill real quick. And we go around and we start doing circles and figure eights. And I'm on my fucking super loud 1000cc street bike, and I'm just like ripping off the fucking rev limiter. My buddy's got a Harley, and it's so fucking ear-blowingly loud. And the cops panic. We see them run back up the fucking hill, and we see the people down start cheering and like charging up the hill, and and then we like go back and we come back, and people were cheering, and we're like, yeah. And I get up on my bike and I stand up, and my bike falls over because I didn't put my kickstand down all the way. And then I get back, I'm like, whatever, fuck it. And they cheer. And it's just this like, it was a very powerful moment of like thinking about, why are we going at here's where our defenses are protected. How do I circumvent this? What tools do I have? What are my advantages? I'm highly mobile. I can make noise. what do I know about the cops? They're entirely looking at us here. We've been at this for 5 minutes, you know, like, yeah, it's just you're right. Like, I am surprised at the way, and even the things in retail, like the thing about Geek Squad that people underestimate is I just talked to thousands of people in my life. I have had thousands and thousands of interactions with people of various demeanors, and like being able to interact and read people in the streets, being able to have casual conversations. Like, I had somebody ask me, well, when have you ever have you ever done a de-escalation workshop? And I'm like, I spent 9 years in retail. I'm not going to do your fucking de-escalation workshop. I will teach you how to de-escalate, you know? So yeah, I'm surprised by that, but I'm so happy. And it makes me look at those like baseline retail and service jobs in a totally different way of like, this is important.
Well, it prepares you for conflict too, because you find yourself in a position where you're inherently in a hierarchy of value. Service workers are usually treated as peons, and you think, well, if within that hierarchy, if you're preserving it, it sucks. But if you're used to, as a victim of abuse, sexual abuse, child abuse, I used to think, oh, well, I'm a victim. And I'm like, no, I'm a survivor. And then suddenly I'm equipped to handle things that other people aren't. You know, Spider-Man, oops, I got bit by the radioactive spider. Oh, it wasn't debilitating. You know, it was something that depends on the version of the story. If you're reading Franz Kafka or watching a Cronenberg film, that's one thing. But the idea is that oftentimes things that might, Friedrich Nietzsche, that which doesn't kill us only makes us stronger. I don't think that's true 100% of the time, but oftentimes things that we might perceive as being a completely victimizing affair, actually, if you find a way to just turn it on its head, suddenly becomes a weapon. And I know so many people who are rape victims who turn it into an anti-predation thing. Just talking about that at all, most people don't know how to handle it, because they'll walk in there and they'll be like, oh, well, you dress kind of funny, you talk kind of funny. They might even use a slur, but the moment you start trotting out something like that, a lot of them don't know what to do. In regards to the Epstein files, a lot of conservatives can't handle that. They hear about it and they're like, no, we're not okay with this. Because that's like the one taboo that many of them, at least in public, won't cross. You know, they're like, no, rape is bad. It's not a good thing, at least publicly. And being able to talk about just the fact that I was raped and that I am a granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, specifically a Dutch resistance member. My grandfather was 10 when the Nazis invaded Holland. He was 15 when they were liberated, but he was doing work and he was in the camps, in and out of the camps. And yeah, it turns out if you crawl under the wire, there might be landmines that you didn't know about at the time. And oh, well, they didn't blow up, so that's he said many years later, well, it makes a man out of you. And I'm like, well, I don't know, Gramps. Well, and he was long dead at that point, because I saw this interview probably 2024. And I'm like, well, Gramps, you died in 2008 from pneumonia, and I'm trans, and I came out, probably 20 years after that, and not quite 20 years, but learning from stories where a lot of times guerrillas or people in positions of disadvantage, asymmetrical warfare, so often, even with Marxist-Leninists, were taught you have to fight with physical violence. You make spears. 7 samurai will make spears. We'll kill all the bandits. And it's like, there is a place for physical violence, but like you demonstrated in your story, you didn't have to pull out a gun and shoot a cop, or you literally were just driving and making noise. Like in Alien Isolation, you have the noisy boxes. You just make the noisemaker, you throw it, the space dog goes and attacks the noisy box. And so a lot of times when you're dealing with cops, it's literally just like, hey, I'm over here. Or the T-Rex from Jurassic Park, you light the flare. Same idea. You're dealing with violence and you're doing things that they perceive as a threat, but they're the one they're the bad actor, and coming from a position where you are used to not having power is paradoxically kind of empowering once you start stepping out of your abuser's comfort zone. And I just wanted to say that, like, I remember watching Easy Rider back in the day, and Akira, and different stories. I guess The Matrix had a motorbike sequence in Matrix Reloaded, if memory serves. I don't like the sequels as much, but I just really respect the work that you do. And wrapping up here, maybe just another 5 minutes, I just wanted to basically give you a chance, if there was anything else that you wanted to say before we go, in regards to trans people, sex workers, directing people towards, is there anything that you would like to plug?
Well, I just want to thank you for the kind words. It makes me emotional when, like, one of the reasons that I've just gone farther and farther down the rabbit hole of being like, I mean, I joke now, right, that I've gone from ally to accomplice to like soldier in the trans foreign legion, because the more I interact with trans people, the more I meet, the more I talk, the more I realize how complicated the trans experience and how many trans people there are out there just like suffering under just overt oppression. Even if it's not the state, it's just like their family, and just like, I hate bullies. I had just enough like gay bullying, like people like, I'm a straight guy. Like I've always been into like I have a trans partner, but like you look at her, and I just made a short about it. It's like one of the guys calls her, "How's your boyfriend?" I'm like, you look at her. It's one of those things where it's like you look at Blair White and you're like, are you fucking stupid? Like, what sense does it make for you to be misgendering someone who looks extremely feminine? Like, you look like a fucking moron when you start talking like that.
Oh yeah.
But like, yeah, just like the world has just gotten worse for trans people, and like it's just made me want to get louder, and it's just so frustrating. It's like I think one of the things that I read about that really radicalized me was the study that like it was related to trans suicide, because I kept running into so many like young, especially when I started making short form content, I started running into like 16, 17, 18-year-old trans people still living in their parents' house, trans people like in school struggling with bullying, struggling in places that they like can't get out. They're upset that they're experiencing puberty that's not the one they want to go through, and there's like all of that. And like I started reading about the statistics around suicide and how one of the things that is the most impactful and reduces a trans person's likelihood to commit suicide is having one person in their life that is willing to like accept them and like validate that. And that was so like, knowing that was like, and then I had a Discord and I was like, I can be that one person for thousands of trans people and just do that. Like that was like very impactful for me. And like, that made me want to talk more about it. And like the things that you say is like, especially now, like in this moment right here today, I can't tell you how disappointing I am to see how many people in like the liberal and like the mainstream left who have effectively abandoned trans people or just do not talk about it because they are clearly so uncomfortable with things like sex work, with things like speaking about sex and biological function just as full stop. Like it's just so frustrating to me. And like the cops being, you know, so bigoted and like overtly bigoted and like on video, unafraid. It's just in our progressive space, the like one of the bluest states in the blue cities in the bluest states has these overtly transphobic cops. You know, like that to me is just like, wow, this country is not in a good spot.
Oh yeah.
And like I'm working very hard to try to, with other groups that are helping house and bring trans people in. I'm like housing a trans person now with me. The second one in like 3 years.
The hiding phase is what.
Yeah, well, just like resettling basically. Like they don't have to be they can be out here, but like they came out of an abusive place. They needed to leave very suddenly. Like, you know, and it's finding a job and finding a place to live and like finding community all from 3,000 miles away is just very difficult. And like, that's now a huge thing we have here in Seattle. Traction, Pacific Northwest, PNW, and the Koi Project are two programs that do that I support, that I know those people and they do good work. They can use money. They can use volunteers.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Other than that, I am very grateful that because you described, like, if you can be that voice for trans people, I've had less than 1,000 YouTubers subscribers on my YouTube channel since like 2014 or something like that. No, to be fair, it was going up, but then I came out as trans and then it stopped. I don't know how else to describe it other than any traction that I got was suddenly gone. And I don't know if it's a glitch in the matrix, shadow banning, whatever, and I know the algorithm changes and they want you to do videos that are this long and then this long, but they don't tell you what the parameters are. But there's also a lot of words that get banned, like trans or genocide or rape or anything else like that. So if when just the fact that you having a larger channel, you know, a couple 100,000 subscribers, maybe 180,000 subscribers, thereabouts, a lot more than me, and I'm like, wow, this person wants to talk to me, you know, but because a lot of times when I reach out to people, you're kind of like tailor-made for it, just because I'm like, I'd be very surprised if you didn't say yes, just because you spend so much time with trans people and you're taking a lot of risks, honestly, just in terms of being on the ground, standing up to cops. I'm like, oh, I have to talk to this person. But the fact that you did, I'm just like so grateful, because I feel like as far as the systems exist, it's a lot easier for me to run into people that tell me I'm crazy, that, you know, call me, you know, the F slur, or that I'm a sex pest. And these are people that you think would know better. Like, I've had YouTubers who seem like they're like hardcore leftists, you know, and they're like, oh, well, you're a dangerous sex pest because you have naked pictures on your website of you. I'm like, yeah, I'm a sex worker. That's kind of par for the course, right? They're like, no, you're crazy. and you're stalking me. I'm like, no, I'm a journalist and I'm writing about you, but this is all. So the fact that I've been able to reach more people who aren't either, calling me slurs or accusing me of things that I didn't do. And in your case, actually willing to sit down with me and talk about the work that you do and the work that I do. And it kind of overlaps because we're all fighting for liberation, and you mentioned that you have a trans partner and you're helping a trans person. That's cool. That is that is so incredibly awesome. You have I'm a total nympho, so I'm trying to be very chaste right now, but I'm just like, thank you for the work that you do, because I'm poly and stuff like that, so I don't want to come on to you or anything, but basically, if you were single, I would, well, just let me know, and
I want you to know the compliment I've gotten in the trans community that it feels so good, and I've gotten it multiple times, is like the number of trans women that are like, you know what? I have totally sworn off men because fucking men are terrible, because look at the fucking, but you know what? I would make an exception for you. Yes. I'm like, oh, yes. That's very sweet of you to say,
Yeah. Very, I'm very much the same way, and it's because it's, but in your case, it's like, it's not that I've sworn off men, but it's hard for me to tell who an ally is. But you're like, if there was a photograph or a picture in the dictionary of ally, it would be your face.
Oh, I'm glad. I do try to model that behavior for people. I definitely, I feel like I'm in the same boat. And I do feel like our solidarity is connected in the same way that my partner is Guatemalan. She's reconnecting with her. You talked about connecting to indigenous spirituality and rights, absolutely. And we did a water ceremony recently and a fire ceremony, and it was really awesome. And I'm very atheist, and I'm very I don't believe in the metaphysical, but I've had so many great experiences, and I very much believe how you think about things and the way that the energy you're putting in this world impacts everything else.
Well, it's social too. It's a storytelling tradition that Mali and New Zealand, to survive and deal with colonizers, would use the reclamation of their culture in ways that would take on a revolutionary character. And you see this with a lot of reactionaries will basically disavow identity politics. But in doing that, they throw the baby out with the bathwater, because of indigenous politics are largely centered around identity. And it's something that they use. It doesn't have to be religious in the Christian or the Puritan ethic kind of way, where is there a soul? Is there a metaphysical, what Derrida would call the transcendental signified? Is there some kind of metaphysical thing out there tied to language? It's no. It's, in my opinion, as an atheist myself, I'm agnostic about that because it's unfalsifiable. I can't prove if there's a God or not. I worship Medusa, but I worship Medusa because it's a lever. It's something that's useful, and I use it symbolically through theory, very different from dogma. And it's not a faith, though I will say it works. But that's not faith, right? That's praxis. And dating my partner, Bay Ryan, and I'm sure that you dating your partner, you've seen the value in indigenous ceremonies. It's not like the Western view of sit around a campfire and sing Kumbaya. There's tremendous social power, the ability to organize and express things as code that the white man is going to look at and be like, and I just say that in the broad post-colonial sense, not you specifically, but the enemy, the state is going to look at that and be like, oh, they're doing that ritual again, but they won't realize that it's actually organizing, it's surviving, and it enriches us, and we connect with the ancestors. I basically, to conclude the video here, a huge thing that I stress is intersectional solidarity, but also consciousness. So Marx talks about class consciousness, and I'm like, well, we don't want to be reductionist, so it's class, culture, and race. And culture is like religion, gender, identity, politics, what Marx would call the superstructure. And if we can find ways to connect to the past, because it's not like Star Wars, you can't talk to a dead Jedi. But when you do these rituals, you can find yourself in a space where you see the value in what they represent, and you can connect to the past, to the ancestors. They call it the wisdom of the ancestors. I call it the wisdom of the ancients, tied to Gothic theory. Same idea. You're not like Hamlet talking to his father's ghost, but you're not talking to the past either. And when you do these things, you describe yourself as Captain America. Well, Captain America's a ghost, right? He's not a real, he's a simulacrum. He's never existed, but he represents an ideal. Often that idea can be corrupted, right? And I hesitate to use the term a better union, a more perfect union, because it makes me think of Obama and a speech that he made, and he's bad. But the idea that if we can walk away from harmful ideas of this language and we can incorporate things like your partner's Guatemalan ceremonies, trans ideas of, I'll link a historian who specializes in trans history that dates back to the ancient period. And a lot of that history is kept alive through social practices. It could be songs, music, hanging out, orgies, that one doesn't get talked about as much in polite discourse, I guess, sex work more broadly, cooking, food. Do you ever go to cookouts? And, you have people and they'll sit around, talk revolution, but then they'll have a really sweet spread, and it's all homemade. It's not like store-bought or anything like that. Culture is a tremendously important thing. And even though you're on the technological side of things, it's still a part of culture, like the Matrix or something.
Yeah.
So...
Can I touch on the balance part?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the thing that the Indigenous society stuff has. As I've gained more knowledge and depth and experience, they really think about like trans people they're considered like more respected, the two-spirit, right? Because you're able to have more context, you're able to see more perspectives and create a better conclusion or more ideas. And yeah, like intersectionality, we have to look at the same thing with cultural intersectionality. My partner has struggled with like trying to feel like, am I Indigenous or am I not? Because I'm born to an Indigenous person, but like I lived a life that is just surrounded by white people in a colonizer state. And she's learned that like, no, I'm a different thing. And my value is I'm able to be a conduit between those communities. I'm able to help translate in the same way that being trans helps you see more things, and like finding our place in the world as being, I think about that way too. Like a lot of ways I feel like myself as a trans leader for other like cis, like white men, like a very problematic, a very important demographic in this moment with fascism at the fucking door. I am trying to provide an alternative of masculinity that still demonstrates strength and still demonstrates that it is not weak, and it is heroic in a positive way, as opposed to heroic in like a destructive way.
I really appreciate the fact that you're willing to talk about your experiences, the relationship with the trans community, your partner or otherwise. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I'll make sure to share anything that you have with my friends. And it's all about these kinds of connections that we make on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's what activism and organizing has taught me, is like every connection is positive. I can't do it all the time, but I like to like spread out and meet new people, especially when they're passionate about stuff, because I've learned that, it takes time. Activism and organizing takes time, and like the fruits of today might turn into something, totally different in a year. And I love that part of it. So absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited to see what else you got going. And yes, definitely send this to me. I'll send you those links after this. And yeah.